I thought about my talk being about can you design a life? And I gave a lot of thought to it. It was really a nice exercise for me. And I came down to believing, no, you really can't. If you're talking about designing a life the way you would design a bridge or a website, where you know exactly what kind of pieces fit together and how each one works and how they potentiate each other, etc. I don't think that it will work. It won't work out like that. You'll run the risk. The danger will be you'll end up with some kind of a artificial, kind of superficial bucket list life, and it won't be an authentic life. But I do think that there are certain design elements that you can put in place to increase the chances that your life will be rich and satisfying, and I'll talk about those a little bit later. The perspective that I come from is the perspective of the end of life. For the last 20 years of my life, I have been devoted, really, to advocacy for people who are dying. And the fact of the matter is that dying in America is just a terrible mess. It's a terrible mess. People do not die the way they want to. Most people say that they want to die in the arms of their loved ones, among the things that they cherish, in the bed where they made love to their spouse. That's not where Americans die. Americans die in intensive care units, acute care hospitals. They die amid tubes and machines, alienated and separated from the people that they love. The fact is, too many people in America suffer needlessly before they die, and too many people get stuck in a prolonged dying process that does nothing to extend their life. It just prolongs their death. It's people who have the courage to face that squarely and plan ahead that my organization I represent and that I've advocated for the last 20 years. I was one of the authors of the Oregon Death with Dignity Act. The Oregon Death with Dignity Act, passed by Citizens Initiative in 1994, allows people who are terminally ill and mentally competent to ask their own doctor for a prescription for medication that they could fill, and they would take it. They would know that they could take it at a time and a place of their own choosing, and it would ensure that their death would be peaceful. That law has been in effect since 1997. It's just been one battle after another. We have advocated for this law in every imaginable legal forum in the country. The state legislature, in Congress, federal courts. We've been to the US Supreme Court twice, and this law is like the little engine that could. It just keeps chugging along, working for the people of Oregon, and now the people of Oregon embrace it dearly, and I think that it's not even vulnerable anymore. For 20 years, more than that, but anyway, a long time, I practiced as a clinician before I went to law school and became a public advocate. I was a clinician as a nurse and a nurse practitioner and a PA, and I worked in every imaginable clinical setting. I did public health on the streets of Harlem. I did night shifts in nursing homes. I did a lot of intensive care and coronary care, a lot of operating rooms and emergency rooms. I rode with EMTs in the fire department in Seattle and delivered CPR in the bleachers of football stadiums. I saw a lot of people die. I saw a lot of people die. And it began to strike me very early, when I was still quite a young nurse, the disparity, the incredible difference in the experience of dying that people had. Some people died hard. They just died hard. And I think of one person in particular who has become kind of a prototype in my mind of a person who dies hard. His name was Otto. He was in the hospital for a long time. He never moved through, you know, the Kubler-Ross stages of death. He never moved from denial to anger to bargaining to acceptance. He stayed in denial, and he just gripped onto life. He refused to let go, and he was in agony. His misery was palpable. that there was no part of him that was going to acquiesce to his approaching death. We knew Otto pretty well because he'd been in the hospital for a long time, as I said, and this man had no visitors. No friends, no family came to visit him. He had no cards, no letters, no flowers at his bedside. He didn't talk on the telephone, he didn't read books, he didn't watch TV, he didn't listen to the radio. His one life experience was moving to out in the hall and down to the solarium. This is how long ago this was. You could smoke in hospitals then. And he would go down to the solarium and smoke his cigarette. That was his life. And as a young nurse, I thought, what is the deal? His life sucks. Why is it so hard for him to let go of it? I don't understand. And I came to juxtapose and contrast that with people who died so easily, so gracefully. And one person in particular, again, a prototype, comes to mind. His name was Nate. I was working in a coronary care unit at a time. He was dying of heart disease. His doctor had the good grace to let him die without a lot of heroics and paraphernalia, and he told us, just take him off all the machines and the wires and let him have a peaceful death. And so we did that. We went and cleaned him up, took out all the wires and tubes, and we told his family that had been stationed outside that it was time to come in and say goodbye to him. And that they did. They paraded in one by one, and they had a very intimate, sweet time with him, every one of them. They told him how much they loved him, how meaningful he had been in their lives, how they would be telling his story to their children and grandchildren. And such a grace and equanimity came from him, emanated from him to the whole room. And his death was just as gentle as a leaf falling from a tree. And I thought, now here's a man who has everything to live for. He has a wonderful life. And look how easily he leaves it. And I realized that death is not the terror. Death is not the nightmare. It's never having lived. That's the nightmare. That's the terror. You know, our unconscious comes to us in our dreams, and it speaks in metaphor. And there's a dream that I'm sure many people in this room have had. It's a very common dream. It's the day of the test. It's a very important test, a very big class, very important to our lives. And we have never bought the book. We have never taken a note. We've never been to one class. We have no idea what this class is about, and it's time for the test. This is a dream about failing to show up for life, failing to show up and pay attention, failing to do the psycho-spiritual work that we're here to do. So I've come to believe that we can't run from death. Of course we can't run from death. None of us is immortal. Death is not something to be run from, but it is something that we can work toward. We can work toward a gentle death. Now, at the same time that I was making my observations at the deathbed, a friend of mine named Sally Ray Henderson was making similar observations from her position as a chaplain in an assisted living facility. And she noticed that some people entered old age with the same kind of acceptance and equanimity that I had witnessed at the bedside of dying patients, people who were dying well. They certainly experienced losses of old age. They were losing mobility, mental function. They couldn't travel the places that they traveled. They couldn't meet with the people, do the things they had done. Yet as the physical, the material aspects of their lives shrunk, their spirits did not. And they maintained a curiosity and an engagement. They could still feel awe and wonder at life's miracle. And they had a certain grace with their old age, and of course people wanted to be around them. Conversely, she noticed that there were people for whom every loss of function, what they could do, what they could think, was accompanied by bitterness and resentment until the circumstances of their lives and their characters kind of crystallized into this hard kernel of bitterness that just characterized their entire existence. And of course, no one wanted to be around them. And Sally Ray thought, well, while I'm relatively young, are there things I can learn from these two experiences, these two paradigms? Are there behaviors that I can change? Are there attitudes I can adopt? Because I'd like to be the first kind of old person and not the second kind of old person. And she came up with a number of criteria, and I'll talk about 4 of them. The first is befriend yourself. Befriend yourself. So often we indulge ourselves in such a hyper-criticism, such a kind of a self-loathing. And I have in mind those late-night sort of whipping episodes of, you idiot, how could you do that? How could you say that? Look how you've ruined that. Your reputation is in shreds. You are worthless. Why do we do this to ourselves? We wouldn't let a friend talk to us like that. Why would we talk to ourselves like that? We are mortal. We have flaws. We wouldn't be embodied if we didn't have work to do. So cut ourselves a break and be a friend. Befriend yourself. The second is learn to grieve. Oh, thank you. Learn to grieve. There's a gentleman named Stephen Jenkinson who does a lot of speaking to palliative care workers. And he's fond of saying, Americans are death-phobic and grief illiterate. Grief illiterate. We don't know how to grieve. Yet it's a basic life skill because, let's face it, life is loss. Everything that we do involves abandoning, leaving behind something that we used to do and we don't do anymore. Our lives will be filled with small losses and big losses. We will experience great losses in our lives. We must learn to grieve them. There's no way around. We can't go around grief. We can only go through grief. And unexpressed grief doesn't go away. Unexpressed grief turns into something so much worse, that is the bitterness and resentment that then will carry with us through a lifetime. Now, everyone grieves in their own way. It can be different, and I will tell you that ritual helps. I know ritual helps. Companionship helps. Humor helps. But we need to learn to grieve. The third thing is acknowledge and have an awareness of the vast interconnected web in which we live. We are connected to everything else in the world and in the universe. Everything animate, inanimate, living and dead, past, present, future. We are all connected, which means everything matters. You matter. Everything that you do and say matters. The slightest touch, the kindest or harshest word, they don't go away. They reverberate in the vast interconnected web of the universe. If we know that, if we know in our hearts that we matter and that everything that we do and say matters, it's a great reminder to show up and pay attention, because there's nothing that we can just dismiss because it doesn't matter. And then finally, establish, recognize a context for our whole lives. Something bigger of which we are a part. Something that will survive us when we're gone. And again, it's different for every person. You know, for some people, it will be community. My context is the community in which I live. For some people, it's family, the heritage of family and the legacy of family. For some people, it's the work that they do and the way that that work changes the world and how that work will live on. For some people, the pillars of context are a certain philosophy, or perhaps a religious faith and the institutions around that religious faith. But the context in which we live defines our very personhood. It gives our lives the meaning that it has and gives us the courage to face our mortality. It's a great constitutional scholar. His name is Ronald Dworkin, and he says, to make someone die in a way that others approve, but to them feels like a contradiction of their life, is a devastating and odious form of tyranny. A devastating and odious form of tyranny. It's the awareness of that tyranny that forms the underpinnings of my advocacy, and my belief, my hope, the principle on which I base everything that I do for dying individuals rests on the belief that if we throw off that tyranny, if as a society we can overcome that tyranny, we can do what Carlos Castaneda says. We can live with death on our shoulder. The gentle, the wise mentor, the one who says to us, treasure this moment. It's precious, it's transient. The one who reminds us to live truly and love deeply and suck every bit of sweetness from every moment of our lives. And I hope that it may be so for all of you. Thank you very much.